Hi, this is Andrew Zizas, President and CEO of New Jersey-based Real Estate Strategies Corporation and your host at CFO Studio. We have the distinct pleasure today of having with us John Moskonas. John is President of the AR Group of Search Companies and is here to talk to us today about exciting opportunities and what's going on in the careers of CFOs and senior financial executives. John, it's nice to have you here today. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
John, there's some interesting dynamics occurring in career opportunities for senior financial executives and CFOs. So let me start by asking you the first question. How's the market for CFO jobs?
Yeah. You know, Andy, that's the question I always get. How's the market? And the answer I always give now is it's mixed. You hear the reports that are out there, and there's no consensus in terms of which direction the economy is going. And so I can say we're bouncing along the bottom, but there are opportunities out there if you look for them.
Okay, so I mean, consistently everyone's saying the economy is mixed, and you're saying the career market is mixed as well.
Sure.
It is.
Yeah.
The market for careers, for CFO careers, has changed drastically from what you've told me in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
What's occurred? What's changed?
Well, if you look back at around 2006, 2007, the unemployment rate was close to 5%. Prior to that, the unemployment rate had gone up to about 7.5%. Took a couple years to get down to about 5%, which is a great level, between supply and demand. Now the unemployment rate is closer to 10%. And you know what? It's going to take a few years to get down to 5% again, more than a few years. But that's okay. There are pockets out there. If, and in today's current regulatory environment, if you're a compliance person or a internal controls person or a risk management person, there certainly are opportunities out there.
So someone with a specialty, someone who's a specialist versus someone who's a generalist in finance.
Yeah.
The opportunities are greater for specialists, is what you're saying.
Well, yeah, that's for sure.
Well, that makes sense. So, all right, so given that, so there are greater opportunities for specialists. The generalists are having a bit of a challenge. We know the economy is still mixed and we still have tremendous unemployment, but the real question is, are companies hiring?
Companies are hiring. You'll just have to find the correct pocket. A few years back, companies were hiring because the company was growing. They were making acquisitions. They were doing post-acquisition integration. A lot of dynamic succession planning, which was needed because the CFO was going to take on a larger and larger role. Right. And now that piece has gone away. But what's left, of course, are succession planning roles, or perhaps the person that's in place just isn't right for the current situation, and there's a need for a change, etc. So, on balance, the growth isn't there, but there's still opportunities out there if you look for them consistently.
So again, focusing on the concept of specialization, historically, CFOs, senior financial executives, were generalists, and they did everything, and they basically had lifelong careers.
Correct.
Now you're saying is those lifelong careers are pretty much gone the way of the dinosaur, but there's a series of specialist opportunities.
Yeah.
And because the role of CFO is so vast and there's so many specialties embedded in the role of a CFO, that there are so many more opportunities, albeit shorter and with a different dynamic.
Correct. Every company will hire for the situation that's at hand with the company.
Right.
So, it used to be that CFOs had a job for X number of years. Now the typical CFO tenure is 2 to 5 years.
Wow.
2 to 5 years. But that's okay. As long as you can keep up with what's going on, as long as you can communicate to the CEO what you're good at, and assuming that you make an assumption that you're going to be in a different role in 5 years.
Right, understood. Are there specific industries or salary levels that are offering more job opportunities, or is it? You said there are jobs that are available and companies are hiring. Is it across all companies, or are there specific industries that are more focused?
We specialize in accounting and finance in the insurance industry, typically on the carrier side. So I can only talk to my industry. Salary levels have come down between 10 and 20%, just on average. But there's an awful lot of consulting that's going on, for instance. And I had a good friend, just as an example, who was a general auditor for a mid-sized insurance firm, and he was looking for a little while, but he took on a consulting opportunity, which actually turned into more of an operational role for him later on because he had the background in internal controls and he had seen so much of the operation. But he never would have had that chance unless he had stepped into a consulting role first off.
Interesting. So he
Yeah.
basically earned his spurs in the consulting role
Sure.
and built a relationship, and they realized what his background was, and it turned out to be a great story.
It happens all the time.
Is anything different for the job market when comparing senior level financial executives to mid-levels, for example?
Well, good question. If you think of a pyramid, there are more bricks in the middle of the pyramid than there are at the top of the pyramid. So any company that is really committed to a talent pool is pipelining in mid-level talent with the supposition that these are the people that are going to lead the company later on. So yeah, there's a few more of those roles out there than there are CFO roles out there.
Tell me about the impact on the CFO employees, the CFO community at large, as it relates to the shift from long-term, lifelong jobs to these short-term jobs. Are they transitioning well as an industry?
Well, what I can say is that on balance, there are more opportunities if you look at the pool of available jobs now or within the last 5 years compared to 20 years ago, because people tend to be specialists now.
Right.
And so it has an effect in terms of the overall CFO market, but as we said before, you can expect to be in a different job probably in every 5 years.
So it's having a positive effect. It sounds like there's more activity, more churn, if you will.
There's more churn.
But a CFO today has to be prepared for a series of roles with maybe some transition in
Yeah,
between.
be prepared and be prepared to communicate what you're good at to the
Okay.
CEO.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. So understand the pain of the corporation,
Yeah.
understand how you can solve it, and be able to back it up.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Tell me about financial executive consulting. I mean, that seems to be a lead-in from what's going on in the world today. You got a lot of opportunities. You've got a lot of highly qualified CFOs looking for positions, and you've got a lot of companies looking for short-term hiring. How does
Yeah.
consulting fit into that?
Consulting is a great way to get your foot in the door for a job eventually, but the longer term value is that every time you step into a consulting role, you're stepping into a pool of contacts, you're expanding out your network where that wouldn't have happened before. And you, as a CFO or any senior finance executive, your job, even though you're in a job, is to be prepared to find your next job while you're working.
And as a consultant, that next job could actually come from the company you're consulting for.
Exactly. And you have the underlying value of networking with everybody else that you touch within the organization.
And is financial executive consulting becoming more prevalent, or is it going to pick up speed? Or
Well, the bottom line is, Andy, companies are afraid to hire on a full-time basis. They're sitting on a pile of cash, but they're afraid to make a commitment. But they can commit to bringing in resources for mission-critical projects, for capacity gap if there's just too much work and not enough people. And if, for instance, the senior executive just isn't right for a particular role, they need somebody to come in that has maybe 5 out of the 10 things that the permanent CFO needs,
Right.
they're going to have a need. So you're going to see more and more consulting going on over the next few years, where back in 2006, 2007, you probably saw more full-time hires.
Makes perfect sense. John, we've got time for one more quick question.
Sure.
If you had to give 1 point to every CFO out there who's in transition or will be in transition as to how he can protect his career going forward, what would be the one piece of information you'd guide him on?
I would really say, Andy, network.
Network.
Network while you're working. There's a big temptation to insulate yourself in a job, and I certainly don't fault anybody for that. You come in at 7 o'clock, you don't leave to 7, 8 o'clock, and people want to go home and coach their kids' soccer game. I know this.
Networking
right?
is the word. John, I'm going to cut you off right
Okay.
there. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This is Andrew Zizas with John Moskonas of AR Group of Search Companies, saying thank you for watching CFO Studio.